Okay, we are going to get started. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stephen Gutsoyan. I am the Assistant Director of Family and Alumni Relations at California Lutheran University. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started for everyone's benefit. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat box located in the Zoom menu. And Dr. Gillies will be answering questions throughout the presentation. We will also have dedicated time at the end for Q&A. When you join the meeting, your video was turned off and your microphone was muted. There's no need to change these settings during the presentation. We want to avoid any excess noise or disruptions during the presentation. Also, the presentation is being recorded, so it will be posted on our website after this for your reference. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bruce Gillies. Dr. Gillies is the Assistant Professor of Business for the School of Management here at Cal Lutheran. His varied career includes 22 years of active duty in the Navy and a number of leadership roles in higher education. His research interests are in career and leadership development, as well as sport team development. His consulting work has provided leadership coaching and training, career development program guidance to Fortune 500s, as well as organization restructuring to governments, small businesses, and international organizations. Today, Dr. Gillies is presenting on a topic that is relevant and I think essential for all of us during these unprecedented times, stress management. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Bruce.
Well, that was a great introduction, wasn't it? Nobody could hear me and I was talking away just happily. So again, welcome everybody. I'm glad that you are all here and joined us today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about stress today. And my interest in stress actually comes from an experience that I had, not quite as significant as what we're experiencing now, but certainly something that probably happens to quite a few of us. I had a small business, a motorcycle shop up in Bakersfield. And during that time, we had an oil glut. This is back in the mid 80s. And the people who used to buy motorcycles, of course, are the people who used to work in the oil fields. So as a result of the layoffs in the oil fields, a lot of people weren't coming in to buy motorcycles. And I still had bills to pay. And my stress level was, as you can imagine, increasing significantly. And I thought there's just got to be something out there that can help me understand what I'm experiencing, what is going on with stress and everything. So today we're going to be talking about what actually do we mean by stress? What is stress? What are the unmanaged outcomes of stress? In other words, if we don't take care of stress, what's going to happen to us? And what are some of the things that we can do to manage stress? Next slide, Stephen. So why do we want to worry about stress? Well, unmanaged stress undermines our quality of life. And notice that I didn't say we need to get rid of stress. Unmanaged stress. We actually need stress in our lives. When we think about if somebody were to say, well, I don't want any stress in my life, then they would probably die because we need stress to move forward. When we get hungry, our body is telling us that there's a difference between what we're experiencing and what needs to happen. So that's stress. When we have a relationship and maybe we're having some problems and unmanaged conflict in the relationship, that's stress. We shouldn't have those kind of conflicts. So we're going to be talking a lot about what is stress, how do we reconcile it in our own minds, and how do we manage that stress? We do know that stress costs companies billions of dollars. When you think about stress in organizations, if people are not managing their stress, they end up with all kinds of problems. They become surly with customers. They become distraught and possibly resort to payback on the organization and many other different things. So we need to figure out, how do we leverage the stress that we have? How do we manage it and leverage it? So we're going to be talking about that today. So basically, stress is a response to a stimulus. Well, what do I mean by a stimulus? Well, something changes in the daily routine of what we're experiencing. These days, we have an enormous stressor on us, right? Our way of life has totally been flipped upside down. It's totally been changed. So we are all responding to that stimulus, right? That change in our environment. How we individually respond to that, though, is going to vary from individual to individual. How do we determine what that individual response is going to be? Well, each of us has a different personality style. Each of us have different experiences. Each of us have different ways of and perspectives on looking at life. So each of us is going to respond a little bit differently. The outcomes of the stress, which are called strains, impact us also differently. And if we don't manage those strains, we're going to have some problems as the unmanaged stressors and strains that impact us start to reflect in our physiological responses to it. So my definition of stress is actually that it's the individual's response to the difference between the experienced situation and the ideal situation, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, the ideal situation that we would like to see right now is that we don't have to worry about the coronavirus. We don't have to worry about the social distancing that we are experiencing now. It should be back to normal. So there's a gap there between what we're experiencing and what we see as the ideal situation. Now, Hans Selye did quite a bit of research back in the early scientific aspects of worrying about stress, and he said it's the non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. It's a psychological response that reflects in our bodily response. So our bodies respond to it in any number of different ways. We experience hypertension. Some of us will start to sweat if we're in a stressful experience, so those kind of things. So we know that there are also different types of stress. There's distress, which are the bad stressors that we experience, and then there's eustress. Now the bad stress, hindrance stressors, are those things that get in the way every day, such as what we're experiencing now. It's getting in our way of living our lives, right? It's a hindrance to what we want to achieve in our lives. So we need to figure out exactly what do we see as the hindrance to us, and how do we adapt to that, and how do we get back to some semblance of normality. On the other hand, we have what we call challenge stressors. Challenge stressors are helpful to us. Challenge stressors motivate us to achieve specific things, timelines, challenges from sports, those kind of things. And in reality, in many cases, we intentionally put ourselves in stressful situations, such as sports. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. We would love to say we're going to win every single match, or if we're in business, we'd love to say we're going to make every single sale. But again, because we know that that's not possible, these are challenges for us. So we motivate ourselves and we look forward to approaching what we can do to achieve those particular ones. Now, the item of eustress is also interesting. Eustress is the positive stressors that we experience, And they are also stressors because it's a change in our environment, right? When you think about a promotion, you're changing from what you're used to, and now you're getting promoted and you don't know exactly what's going to be expected of you in the new situation. So eustress is also a stressor. We'll talk more about a few of those in just a minute. Now, this is a graph of the human function curve, which shows us a little bit about our performance level in response to stress. So when we think about performance, we're thinking about, again, everyday life, maybe performing in business, maybe performing in sports, maybe performing in our relationships, whatever it might be. We need to understand what level of performance is expected of us. Notice that on the bottom axis there, along the line, we have the arousal stress, right? The thing that is getting us motivated to have to address this particular thing. And you'll see, we call this the inverted U model, but you can see that we have healthy tension, the stress that we need. You notice that we have a combat zone, which is where our body starts to say, hey, something is different. We need to figure out what's going on here. We continue to be in that combat zone until we start to experience fatigue. Then we start to experience exhaustion, ill health, and ultimately breakdown if we don't manage that. Now, Hans Selye came out with a specific model called the General Adaptation Syndrome. Stephen, I think there's some pop-ups in there if you click on the next one. So we initially become aware of a stimulus, right? Wow, there's a police car behind me. I need to respond to something. Our initial ability to stress is initially reduced. Maybe we focus on that too much, or we swerve a little bit, and we continue to resist that through various means, rationalizing, identifying how we're going to respond to it, and we start talking to ourselves through that. We start to use our resources to attempt to resist the stimulus, whatever it might be, until they've been depleted. And then we start to see exhaustion. Once we have experienced all our exhaustion has been depleted, that's when we start seeing mental and physical symptoms, possibly to include death if somebody's experiencing too much stress. One of the things that I want to point out, though, go back to that previous one, if you would, Steve, please. Thank you. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that stress is not always a perception of psychological stress. We also experience physical stress, stress such as loud noise, too much heat, too much cold, vibration. Those kind of things are also stressors. Too much gravity, right? Those kind of things are also stressors on us. And we try to resist those particular things until we run out of resources. So our body understands those particular kind of elements, and we need to be able to realize that we're just trying to fulfill that gap, right? Fulfill that gap between what we see as the real situation and what we see as the ideal situation. Next one, Steve. Thanks. So why do some people get more stressed out than other people? Well, there's a theory called transactional stress, which is basically two stages of stress that we experience. The first one is that primary appraisal. Is this something I need to be stressed about? Maybe you're driving down the road and that police car pulls up behind you and the lights pop on behind you, and you immediately evaluate, is this something that I need to be stressed about? And as the police car pulls around you and continues to move forward, then we say, oh, it wasn't for me, it was for somebody else, right? So we have a tendency to evaluate that initial stressor to determine if something we need to stress about or not. Sometimes, again, they're benign demands. They're nothing that we really need to work about. My coffee mug is empty. I need to go get more coffee, right? That's a benign demand. We don't really need to worry about that. So after we've completed that primary appraisal, then we get into a secondary appraisal. Do I have the resources to cope with this particular demand? What is the gap? And do I have the resources to cope with that? Let's say you write a check, and the check is more than what you have in your bank account. So your initial response when you get that notification from the bank, as that primary appraisal is this something I need to worry about? And you see, yes, I've written a check. I don't have enough money in the bank. I'm stressed about it. Secondary appraisal, can I move money from someplace else? Do I have the resources to cope with this particular demand? So once we identify that, then we can start taking action on that. So the transactional theory of stress combined with our discussion of the hindrance and the challenge stressors can be seen in this particular graphic here. Notice that we have work and non-work stressors. We have hindrance and challenge stressors. The work and hindrance stressors, again, are helpful in a way, right? Role conflict, we need conflict in the workplace in order to move forward. Role ambiguity is typically what we see when we get into a new job. We don't really know exactly what's expected of us. Some daily events, perhaps parking, although parking now is a breeze, and perhaps role overload, right? The work challenge stressors, which are the good ones that we're looking for, time, right? That time constraint. If I never gave my students a deadline for submitting any assignments, then they never get those done. So challenge stressors and time deadlines are an important one. The complexity of the work, as we increase our skills, the complexity should increase. That's again a gap, but we need to be able to be aware of that. And additional responsibilities. On the non-work side, again, uncertain financial future, negative events in life, and work-family balance, as well as the enormous cloud that's hanging over our head right now with COVID. We need to be aware of those types of things as well. And they do get in our way, and they are a stressor for sure. Challenge stressors, though, time demands from family, your professional development, and again, as I mentioned earlier, positive events in life. So here are some of the major stressors in life. And you can see that death of a spouse, divorce, jail term, marriage, and all of these are some of the life events. And the number of stressors in life change as we get through technology and world events occur. We're probably sitting up around a 90 to 95 right now globally with the amount of stress that we're experiencing. And as you look at these things, you might say, you know what, these things somehow involving relationships. And that's very true. When you think about the death of a spouse, divorce, again, a loss of a relationship, although in some cases, a jail term, you might end up with new relationships. Marriage, obviously, is a high-level stressor. Again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen as well. Vacations can be stressors, but again, at the lower end, again, it's an adventure. We don't know what's going to happen. And clearly down at the bottom, minor violations of the law. So we need to be able to evaluate where we are with respect to these major stressors in life. If we can put things in perspective, we see that maybe, maybe what we're experiencing now is not quite as bad as a divorce or death of a spouse. Again, what we don't know is how this is going to turn out, right? And that's the loss of control. There's that gap again between what we want to have happening and what we actually experience is happening. So again, everybody responds to the same stressful events differently, such as if we were all on an elevator and we were going up to the top of the Empire State Building, and the elevator suddenly crunches to a stop at about floor 66 and a half, right? We're stuck in the elevator. All of us, all 40 of us in one elevator. We would all be experiencing that stress differently. Some people might say, I've been in elevators before that have gotten stuck. It's not a big deal. We'll get out of here eventually. Others might say, oh my gosh, I'm claustrophobic. Now we're stuck in this elevator. So we need to be aware of our stress responses and other people's stress responses as well. But again, as I mentioned earlier, there's positive events that are also stressful, such as weddings, promotions, births. Again, they're a change in our environment. They're a change in what we have experiencing currently. So there's a change that we're experiencing and a gap between what we see as the ideal situation and what we want to have happen right now, right? What we're currently experiencing. So when you know what the outcomes of the strains are, again, you can use the stress experience to motivate yourselves to become more hardy and resilient to environmental changes. So when we think about what the outcomes are of stress, whether it's going to be are they motivating us more? Perhaps they are, limiting us in what we want to do. We need to be aware of those things. And we know that outcomes are multi-level. Individuals experience stress differently, teams can experience stress differently, and organizations overall can experience stress differently. But we need to be aware of these things and aware of our self-awareness of how we respond to stress in given situations. So strains. These are the outcomes of unmanaged stress, right? We have three basic areas. The physiological strains, what happens to our bodies, psychological strains, what we're thinking about, what goes on within our mind, and then behavioral strains. What do people see and what we're actually doing? Physiological strains, again, bodily responses to stressors. We might get ill, right? If we get a virus of some kind and we get ill, that is, again, a difference in our environment, in our internal environment, right? We have high blood pressure as a result of that. Some of us experience back pain, stomach aches. You might experience other physiological strains such as hypertension, sweating, those kind of things. And again, these are all unmanaged responses to stressors in our lives. Psychological strains, again, long-term, we have burnout. People get depressed. We might get angry. We find ourselves becoming more irritable, distracted, and forgetful because, again, these are things, unmanaged stress, and these strains are things that distract us from what we need to be doing. Behavioral strains, again, what do people see in us? We might grind our teeth at night. We don't even know it, and we're grinding our teeth. We might become overly bossy or overly critical. Some might result in drug abuse or even excessive smoking. Others will have a positive element of behavioral strains. Instead of letting these things get to us, people might start working out, might start reading books to become distracted, or other positive ways of dealing with these particular stressors and strains. So the key to stress and these strains is self-awareness. You have got to know what your own personal stress level is. What pushes your buttons the most? Today, again, all of us are experiencing the equal amount of stress across everything. I noticed that San Luis Obispo yesterday put a mandate to remain in place, right? And again, they had several exceptions to that. But again, how are we going to respond to that? If we're stuck in our house for a while, how are we as individuals going to respond to that? For myself, my house might become a lot cleaner. But again, we need to know how are we supposed to respond to these particular things. Know your relationships. What are the levels of relationships? How do you expect people to respond in different situations? This is going to be key to maintaining solid relationships and maintaining positive relationships. You're going to have some conflict. There's no way you're not going to, because we all have conflict, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different of ideas, but we need to know about that. We also need to know our own limits. Some folks might say, I like camping. Some folks might say, I do not like the outdoors. Too many bugs, animals, those kind of things. We all need to know our limits from that perspective. So again, know your stress limits and know what strains you might experience as a result. Unmanaged stress, again, you get poor productivity, indecisiveness, you can't make a decision. There might be some dysfunctional conflict in organizations. Clearly, if people have a lot of stress in an organization, they're going to desire to leave and leave the organization. Might have errors in judgment, safety incidences go up, and again, we have poor adjustments in our relationship. As we experience conflict, we have a tendency to not be able to adjust to it or see it as a personal attack on ourselves, when in reality, it might be more related to the issue at hand. So again, understand stress is a challenge. It is a challenge for us to deal with the situation that we're in now. We need to understand and maximize this experience. How are we going to be able to use this in the future? We can learn how to be resilient and again, learn how to become more hardy as a result of what's happening. This isn't going to be forever. We know that there'll be an end to it, but we need to take care of ourselves at this particular time. Again, know your evaluate your own stress levels, and again, understand your relationships. So how do we cope with stress? This is a technique that a lot of people say, well, I get stressed out, I don't know what to do. So we know that we can be trained in stress, and how we respond to the stress is up to our individual differences. Again, unhealthily might be excessive sleeping, might be procrastinating, overeating or undereating, or even dissociation. From a health perspective, we need to be able to realistically evaluate the stress that we're experiencing. Seek assistance in dealing with the situation. If you're starting to run out of those resources we talked about, and you're starting to experience exhaustion, get additional resources. Exercise, great way to distract yourself and build up your resilience level a little bit more. Discussion, again, a catharsis, talking about it. Seek therapy if you need to, and develop some specific coping strategies. We'll talk more about the coping strategies in just a minute. So how do we cope with stress? Well, there's three major ways, and each one of these can be used in a specific time. Enactive coping, proactive coping, and reactive coping. So here's examples of the different ways that we can use these coping styles, right? Enactive coping, eliminate the stressors in the first place. That would be great, wouldn't it, if we could just get rid of all stressors in our life, but we really can't. Some examples are time management. Maybe there's some crunches. Maybe we need to evaluate what the time management requirements are. Build our emotional intelligence, understand ourselves, and understand how we respond and interact with other people. Build a team around you. Let's all get together and talk about specific elements of stress. Maybe sometimes if you're stressed at work, you can redesign your work. And finally, planning. Planning can get rid of a lot of those stressors that are there. Proactive is developing resiliency. And again, this is a long-term strategy. It can be a moderately time requirement. And again, it can sometimes take place by simply exposing yourself to a stressor you know is there, but at a smaller level, maybe a test, if you will. Make sure that you exercise and eat right, get plenty of sleep. Again, develop your self-confidence as well. Talk to family and friends and use them as supporting references. And spirituality can be very helpful as well. And finally, with the reactive one, again, this is temporary. We've experienced the stressor. Now we have to deal with it. Think about it. Relaxation is a very good way of doing it, of coping with it. Thought management, visualization, and imagery are very, very helpful. What's it going to look like on the other side? If you have a specific high-intensity event coming up, think about 3 days from that event. What will you feel like? Visualize yourself in that particular situation. And again, use activities. Distract yourself from that particular mechanism by, again, distracting yourself from the specific stressful event there. So as an example, if you're stressed about having too much to do at work, emotional support from a spouse is not going to help as much as being a better delegator at work, getting it off your plate. Another example is if you don't know how to do a critical task, increasing time or money is not going to help, but get advice, get training on it. Again, talk to other people. So make sure that you pick the right coping style. If you don't pick the right coping style, the stress is just going to continue to build up. Time management skills. I teach my students this frequently, right? Identify what's most important. What's important and urgent, not important but urgent, important but not urgent, and finally, neither important nor urgent. Identify those and make yourself up a list. Maintain a time log for yourself. See where all of your time is spent. Ask yourself, what is it? What is this moment about? What should we be doing right now? What is this day about? What's going to happen today? And then finally, what should be happening in this year? Again, some of these things are going to help with the current situation. What is this event about? What is the real thing that we're trying to resolve here? Finally, don't accept monkeys. Sometimes we take on stress that's not ours. It's not our responsibility to stress for other people. Sometimes we try to control things we can't control. And we need to see a new perspective on how do we fit in the bigger picture, right? And sometimes we stress about what if? What if something happens? What if I run out of money? Again, rather than focusing on what is, we focus on what if. Pay attention to what's stressing you, right? Know about it. What is the current situation? What is it about the stress that's really worrying you? Is it the disease itself? Is it the fact that we have to maintain a social distance? Is it the fact that we don't have control over what we get to do and say? Understand what is it really that's stressing us. Make sure we take care of ourselves. There is absolutely nobody out there that can take better care of you than yourself. Make sure you use effective time management skills. And sometimes, again, you may have to redesign your work. From moving from a paper-based solution, maybe you have to go to a computer-based solution. And make sure you set boundaries around what you will and will not tolerate. One of these key boundary elements is learning how to say no. Sometimes people ask us to do things and we don't need to learn how to say no. So again, use recreation, celebrate what we do have, socialize as much as you can, and use relaxation and visual imagery to put yourself in a place where you can relax, where maybe you've had a really good experience before, and visualize what did it feel like? What did it sound like? What did it look like? Evaluate the situation and make sure you communicate with other people for support. Appreciate life. Again, put things in perspective. Evaluate the news that we receive for validity. There's a lot of it going on out there right now. Make sure what you're responding to, what you're forwarding to other people is actually valid. Maintain a healthy work-life balance. Get that exercise that you need to. Maybe find a hobby that you can start now if you've got time on your hands. And make sure you turn off the electric leash when you can. Sometimes we're bombarded with information and we just need to escape from that for a little bit. So make a plan for stress management. If you know the stress process, again, all the way from that initial response, all the way through the exhaustion stage, you can manage your resources. You can get better resources and manage that stress. Assess your own resiliency capability. How much resiliency do you have? When do you need to back away from a situation and let it be? And develop those effective coping techniques by either elimination, building your resiliency, or temporarily responding to a stressful situation. So if you want to know more, there's a couple of books out there that I would recommend. Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. Take a look at the stress management talks on TED Talk, and go to stress.org. There are plenty of resources there. All right, so to wrap it up, again, stress is not unique to any of us. We all experience stress, but we can learn stress coping skills. We need to be able to learn how to use those. Any skill can be acquired, but we have to practice it. If you don't practice stress coping skills, you won't be able to perfect them for yourself. The biggest thing, self-awareness. Know what stresses you, know your appropriate level of stress, and know how to cope with stress that's unmanageable. All right, let's open it up to questions. Steve? You're on mute now, Steve, your turn.
It had to be one of us. I am just looking through the chat right now to see if there's any questions. It doesn't look like there were any questions, but if anyone has anything that they want Bruce to dive a little deeper into, or any questions from the discussion, please feel free to throw them in the chat now, and we'll have Bruce address those questions. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. So we'll give
Hi, Laura. I see a question from Laura there. Good question. Again, one of those ways is delegation, and effective delegation is certainly a stress management technique that we can all learn. A lot of times we'll delegate a project to somebody, they'll come back to us and say, I don't think I can handle this, or maybe there's a question here, and we have a tendency to want to solve it for them. Don't solve it for them. Let them go out and try it on their own. Delegation, again, is a skill that needs to be practiced, and it's scary. Delegation is scary. You're losing control of something, and again, we need to be able to trust our people to be able to do the right thing and empower them to do the right thing.
Okay, Bruce. Next question is about dealing with stress as a parent. How do you not pass that stress along to your kids?
Yeah, that's a good one. One way is to get them out of the house and get them distracted a little bit, because once they're out and playing in a playground or something like that, you'll be able to relax a little bit more, keeping an eye on them. When you're talking with them about the current situation, again, be honest with them. Let them know it's a scary time. We've not experienced something like this before. But again, assure them that you're going to be there for them, and let them understand those kind of things, and encourage questions. Encourage them to ask questions so that they can clarify things.
Okay.
Lower participation numbers. Group stress because of lower participation numbers. And then on top of this, you talk about like productivity. I think, Connie. Again, just like you would with kids or any other group, again, talk to them, find out what their concerns are, talk to them, and maybe they'll have answers actually that are better than what we could come up with as individual leaders. Discussion, again, is a great opportunity to talk about how to find out and get new ideas. Your folks are living the experience. What do they have? They've all got ideas. Let's listen to the ideas and find out what they think might work. You don't have to take them all into consideration and use them all. But if you don't know what they're recommending, you can't use it. So get the information from them, let them talk about it, and you'll find that, again, they can probably come up with some really good ideas.
Okay, I had a question come in, I think just privately to the group chat, but it's about managing stress at home when you're also working at home with your children. How do you find the balance in that?
Sure. If you are the only one there to watch for the children, and again, depending on the age, you have to, again, manage time. Sometimes it's easier in the evening to try and get as much work done as possible if you can in the evening after the kids are in bed, and spend time with the kids during the day. Put them in front of the television for a bit. I know that seems like we've always been told don't use that electronic babysitter, but if you've got to get things done, and today's times are extraordinary, sometimes we have to take those extraordinary measures. Again, the children can be stressful. I know, I've got 8. So I think I've probably managed to figure out the stress with children. Get them engaged in games, and outdoor games as much as practical. Again, indoor games can be a distraction as well. And again, encourage them to talk, maybe set some specific time zone and say, Mom or Dad's got to work for the next 15 minutes. I just need 15 minutes to check on things, and then we can do something else, and I'll be right back with you.
Okay. Lots of good questions about working from home. This one's about kind of setting expectations while you're working from home.
How to set expectations for everybody when working from home? Yeah, that's a leadership issue that the leaders need to have with their folks. What exactly are we expecting during this time frame for you to be productive? On the other side of this, how will we know if we were successful or not as a result of this particular event? In a month, how will we know if we were successful in handling the situation? What exactly will we be looking for? Will we be looking for feedback from at Cal Lutheran from our students? Will we be looking for additional student questions about these things? Exactly what do we need to see? What do we expect to see at the far end of this? And this, again, discussion with the teams can be very helpful from this perspective. I see a couple other questions in the chat box here as well. How do you help somebody who's really stressed out and loses perspective? Again, sit down and talk with them. What are they afraid of? Where is the fear coming from with that particular individual? Perspective is, again, individualized to each one of us. Some folks have different experiences. This might be something brand new and very, very scary for somebody. Other folks may have experienced similar things before, and you can make that relationship connection to what they've experienced before and what's going on now. So sometimes that can be helpful as far as talking it out, and then asking them, what do they see as in a month, how will they be? Do not exceed your own expertise. There are lots of resources out there that are very helpful right now to help people that are experiencing extreme stress. Lots of therapists are offering free therapy. There are a lot of resources out there. So again, if you're experiencing talking with somebody yourself, and you appear to be at a crossroads and you're exceeding your own resources, by all means, get more resources.
Okay, so one more question. What do you do personally to relieve stress?
Good, excellent. Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I like to clean the house if I'm experiencing stress. I do some writing as well. I'll sit down and I'll write about experiences. What do I think is going to happen? What do I see happening with other people? That can be helpful as a catharsis as well. I enjoy getting out by myself. I noticed that up again, the San Luis Obispo, when they were talking about the exceptions, they said you can go out and hike, right? There's nothing that says you can't go out of your house to hike other than sheltering in place. So if you need to get out and exercise, you can do that as well. But again, do it smartly, right? So there's any number of different distractions. Movies are a great way to do it. I'm sure there's probably many, many movies that we have not seen, again, to occupy us and distract us during this time.
Great. So it looks like we've gone through all the questions and we're just about out of time. So I will wrap this up. I want to thank Dr. Gillies for taking time out of his day and
You're
presenting
welcome.
to us on this important topic. I hope all of you on the call got some great coping mechanisms and some good perspective on your stress and what's going on in our current situation. I know I did, and we'll definitely take away some good learning outcomes from that. The next piece I just want to share, next week we have our next Continuing Through Social Distancing webinar scheduled. Dr. Jamshid Damoy is going to be presenting on a study about giving our attention to the future of caregiving of an aging population. I think that's in conjunction with a VCCF study that was done. So that is next week, March 26th at 10 a.m. The registration will be on our website shortly. So thank you once again, everyone, for taking time out of your day to join us on this call. Thank you again, Dr. Gillies. Have
You're
a
welcome.
great rest of your week and stay healthy, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.